Richard Sterling didn't even flinch. Before him stood two women, his wife of 20 years, the architect of his early life, and his mistress, the vibrant young woman who promised a future without history. He looked at Catherine, his wife, the mother of his now grown son, and the words he spoke were not an apology, but a verdict. "I choose her." He thought it was the end of a chapter, a simple, brutal transaction. He had no idea he had just handed the woman he discarded the very weapon she would use to burn his empire to the ground. The penthouse on Park Avenue was less a home and more a museum exhibit on wealth. Polished marble floors reflected the sprawling New York City skyline like a dark, glittering ocean. Art curated with an expert's eye, Catherine's eye, adorned the walls. Each piece was a quiet testament to a journey they had once taken together, from a cramped apartment in Queens to this sterile perch atop the world. It had been Catherine's refined taste, her understanding of art and architecture, that had helped Richard Sterling transition from a ruthless, brilliant coder into a celebrated titan of finance and technology. Sterling Capital wasn't just a company. It was an empire, and Catherine had been its silent, uncredited co-architect. For the past 3 years, however, the silence in their home had become a presence of its own, a cold, heavy blanket smothering the embers of what was once a partnership. Richard was consumed not by work in general, but by one singular obsession, the Sterling Tower. A needle of shimmering glass and steel piercing the clouds over Hudson Yards. It was to be his legacy, his monument. He spoke of it with a fervor once reserved for her. He'd spend nights poring over revised schematics, his brow furrowed in concentration, waving away her attempts at conversation. "It's not just a building," Cat he'd said months ago, his voice distant. "It's a statement. It's the world's first truly smart skyscraper. The integrated OS, the energy efficiency. It's a living entity." Catherine, who held a master's degree in architectural history from Columbia, had been instrumental in the tower's initial concept. She had sketched the first elegant lines, proposed the use of sustainable materials, and even suggested the very plot of land. But as the project grew, so did Richard's ego. Her input was gradually phased out, replaced by a team of fawning young architects who echoed his every pronouncement. She had become like the art on the walls, a beautiful, static part of the background. The distance became a chasm the day she found the receipt. It wasn't for a piece of jewelry or a lavish dinner. It was a 5-figure charge from a boutique hotel in St. Bart's, dated during a week Richard was supposed to be at a tech symposium in Berlin. A simple search of the hotel's social media tag on Instagram brought up a photo. There was Richard, tanned and laughing, his arm draped possessively around a stunningly beautiful woman in her late 20s. Her name was Amber Collins, a rising star in Sterling Capital's marketing division. Catherine had met her once at a company gala. She remembered Amber's predatory ambition, the way her eyes tracked Richard like a hawk. Catherine didn't confront him immediately. For 2 weeks, she moved through their life like a ghost observing. She noted the secret smiles at his phone, the late-night board meetings that left him smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers, a cloying sweet scent called Scandal. The name was almost laughably appropriate. She watched as he praised Amber in company-wide emails for her innovative marketing strategies. Strategies Catherine knew were just repackaged versions of ideas she herself had given Richard over dinner years ago. He was not just cheating on her, he was replacing her piece by piece with a younger, shinier model. The final unbearable piece of evidence came in the form of an overheard conversation. Richard was in his home office, the heavy oak door left slightly ajar. He was on the phone, his voice low and intimate. Of course, the penthouse suite in the tower will be for you. For us, he murmured. It's our future baby. Forget the old museum. This is where we'll really live. The old museum. That was her. That was their life, their shared history. Their son Robert, now studying abroad at Oxford. All of it relegated to a dusty exhibit hall. A cold, clarifying rage, sharper than any grief she had ever felt, settled in Catherine's chest. The years of being his sounding board, his social strategist, his quieted partner, the woman who had sold her own small architectural firm to support his fledgling company. It all coalesced into a single, hard point of betrayal. That evening she waited for him in the cavernous living room, the lights of Manhattan twinkling indifferently behind her. She had dressed for battle, not in armor, but in a simple, elegant black dress. On the glass coffee table, she had placed a single printed photograph, the one from St. Bart's. Richard walked in, loosening his tie, a weary but self-satisfied look on his face from a day of conquering the financial world. He saw the photo, and his expression didn't shift to guilt or panic. It hardened into annoyance, as if she had discovered a minor accounting error, not the demolition of their vows. "Catherine," he began, his voice flat. "Let's not make this unnecessarily dramatic." "I think we're well past that point, Richard," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. "The question is, what happens now?" He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled silver hair. He walked to the bar and poured himself a whiskey, the clink of the decanter against the glass, the only sound in the room. He didn't offer her one. "Amber and I... It's serious," he said, turning to face her, his back to the city lights. "She understands the pressures I'm under. She's part of the future I'm building." "And what am I?" Catherine asked, the question hanging in the air like a guillotine. "Part of the past you're demolishing." He had the audacity to look almost sympathetic. "You've been a wonderful partner, Kat. You helped me get here. But my life, my needs, they've evolved. You haven't. The insult was designed to gut her, to make her feel obsolete. And it did. For a fleeting second, she felt a wave of nausea, of crushing inadequacy. She saw herself through his eyes, a 45-year-old woman whose best years were behind her, a relic in an old museum. But then the cold rage returned, a welcome fire in the ice. "So you're leaving me for her," she stated. It wasn't a question. At that moment, the elevator chimed its private doors, opening directly into the penthouse foyer. Amber Collins stepped out. She was dressed in a vibrant red dress that screamed for attention, her expression a practiced blend of nervousness and triumph. Richard had summoned her. He had turned their final confrontation into a coronation for his new queen. The sheer calculated cruelty of it took Catherine's breath away. Amber walked to Richard's side, slipping her hand into his. She looked at Catherine not with pity, but with the cool assessment of a victor. Richard took a sip of his whiskey and delivered the final blow. It was the moment that would define the rest of their lives. "It's cleaner this way," he said, his gaze as cold as the marble beneath their feet. "I choose her." He expected tears. He expected a scene, shouting, pleading. What he got was a silence so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. Catherine looked from his impassive face to Amber's smug one. She didn't break. She didn't crumble. A strange, serene clarity washed over her. He thought this was the end. He was so wrong. This was the beginning. She gave a slow, deliberate nod, her eyes locking onto his. "I see," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Thank you for your honesty, Richard. It's more than I've had from you in years." Then she turned and walked towards their bedroom. Her posture perfect, her steps measured. She closed the door behind her without a sound, leaving the new couple standing in the vast, silent monument to a life she had built and which they had just defiled. They thought they had won. They had no concept of the war that was about to begin. The bedroom, once a sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum. Catherine walked past the king-sized bed they had shared for 2 decades, her eyes tracing the familiar patterns of their life, the books on her nightstand, the silver-framed photo of a young Robert on the dresser, the faint indentation on the pillow where Richard's head used to rest. She felt a tremor of grief, a deep, shuddering sob that threatened to tear through her composure. She allowed it for exactly 60 seconds. She leaned against the cool glass of the window overlooking Central Park, pressed her forehead to it, and let the pain wash over her. Then she pushed it down. Grief was a luxury she could not afford. Survival required a different currency anger. She did not pack a bag. Everything in this apartment, in this life, felt tainted. Instead, she walked into her dressing room and opened the safe hidden behind a full-length mirror. Inside was her personal jewelry, a few sentimental heirlooms, and an emergency portfolio containing her own pre-marriage investments, a modest sum she had guarded fiercely, a just-in-case fund that now felt like a stroke of prophetic genius. She took it all. When she emerged, Richard and Amber were still in the living room, whispering by the bar. They looked up startled, as if they had already forgotten her presence. "My lawyer will be in touch tomorrow, Richard," Catherine said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "I'll be staying at the Carlisle until I find a more permanent arrangement." Richard's face tightened. The mention of a lawyer brought the practical financial reality of the situation into focus. "Catherine, there's no need for this to be ugly. I'm prepared to be very generous." Generous? The word tasted like ash in her mouth. "You think you can put a price on 24 years, on building your name, your company, your reputation, on raising our son while you were chasing deals and apparently your employees?" Amber stiffened at her side. "There's no need to be vulgar." Catherine's gaze snapped to the younger woman. It was the first time she had directly addressed her. "You don't get to speak," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous octave. "You are a guest in my home, a temporary one. Enjoy the view while it lasts." Before Amber could retort, Catherine turned her back on them and walked to the elevator. As the doors slid shut, the last thing she saw was Richard's face, a mask of irritation and surprise. He had expected a weeping, broken woman. He was faced with a stranger. The next 48 hours were a blur of sterile hotel rooms and strained phone calls. The first was to her son, Robert. It was the hardest call of her life. She told him the truth simply and without embellishment. She heard the shock in his voice, then the quiet fury on her behalf. "I'm flying home, Mum," he said immediately. "No," she insisted, her voice firm. "You will not throw away your scholarship and your future because of him. You will finish your term. You will excel. That will be the best thing you can do for me right now. Promise me, Robert." He promised reluctantly. Knowing she had his love untainted by his father's betrayal was a small, solid anchor in the storm. The second call was to David Chen, a partner at a top Manhattan law firm. David wasn't a bulldog divorce attorney who thrived on salacious headlines. He was a meticulous corporate litigator she and Richard had used in the early days of Sterling Capital. He was sharp, discreet, and he owed her. She had been the one to recommend him to Richard, a move that had made David's career. They met in a private room at his firm's midtown office. The space was all polished mahogany and the scent of old money. David, a trim man with kind eyes that belied a razor-sharp mind, listened patiently as she recounted the events. "I've already received a call from Richard's lawyer, Gerald Roth," David said when she finished. "He's offering a settlement, a one-time payment of $50 million, the Hamptons house, and the art collection. In exchange, you sign a comprehensive NDA. Catherine let out a short, bitter laugh. 50 million. To a normal person, it was a fortune. To Richard Sterling, whose net worth was estimated to be north of 12 billion, it was a rounding error. It was an insult. It was the price he was putting on her silence, on her erasure. "He wants to buy me off and shut me up," she said. "Essentially," David confirmed. "It's a clean break for him. No claims on Sterling Capital stock, no further entanglements. He gets to install Ms. Collins in the new tower and pretend the last 20 years never happened. And the NDA is ironclad. You wouldn't be able to speak about him, his business, or your marriage to anyone, ever. No books, no interviews, nothing." This was the core of it. He didn't just want to discard her. He wanted to gag her. He was terrified that the woman who knew all his secrets, the ruthless deals, the corners he'd cut, the ideas he'd borrowed, would talk. He saw her not as a spurned wife, but as a liability. "Tell Gerald Roth to go to hell," Catherine said, her voice hard as steel. "We're not accepting. We're fighting." David leaned forward, his expression serious. "Catherine, I have to be frank. Richard has the best legal team money can buy. Roth is a shark. They'll drag you through the mud. They'll claim you were just a homemaker, that you had no real role in the company's success. They'll try to paint you as a bitter, greedy woman." "Let them try," she replied. "I'm not after his money, David. Not like that. I don't want to spend the rest of my life on a beach, sipping cocktails paid for with his hush money. I want what I'm owed. I helped build that company. My ideas, my strategies, my support, they are in the very dough of Sterling Capital. Proving that will be next to impossible. You were never on the payroll, never had a title." "But I was in the room," she shot back. "I was on the calls, and I have the notes." For years she had kept meticulous journals. Not diaries of feelings, but notebooks filled with ideas, meeting summaries, and strategic plans she had formulated for Richard. She had sketched out marketing campaigns on napkins, drafted letters to investors, and outlined the entire corporate philosophy that Richard now touted as his own singular vision. She had done it out of love and partnership, never thinking she would need it as evidence. But the true shattering came a week later. Richard, through his lawyer, had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The media, catching the scent of a high-profile split, went into a frenzy. Richard, ever the master of public relations, had his team leak a carefully crafted narrative. Anonymous sources close to the couple spoke of how Richard had outgrown the marriage, how he was a forward-thinking visionary, and Catherine was stuck in the past, unable to keep up with his dynamic world. They painted her as a society wife, content to live off his success while he was the lone genius. And then came the final public humiliation. Page 6 ran an exclusive, complete with paparazzi photos of Richard and Amber leaving a gala. Amber's hand resting on his arm, a massive diamond engagement ring on her finger. The headline read, "Sterling's new foundation, Billionaire builds future with young VP as marriage becomes a teardown." They were engaged, before the ink on the divorce filing was even dry. He wasn't just divorcing her. He was publicly and systematically erasing her, replacing her so quickly and completely that it was as if she had never existed. Sitting alone in her hotel suite, the newspaper spread out before her, Catherine felt the last vestiges of her old life burn away. The hurt, the sadness, it was all consumed by a cold, incandescent fury. He had called his affair a new foundation. He was building his future on her ruins. She looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline. In the distance, the skeletal frame of the Sterling Tower clawed at the sky. His legacy. His monument to himself. Built with her ideas, funded by a company she helped create and designed to be the love nest for her replacement. A slow smile touched Catherine's lips, but it held no warmth. It was the smile of a general surveying a battlefield. Richard thought the war was about assets and alimony. He was a fool. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about legacy. He wanted to tear hers down. She would obliterate his. And she knew just where to place the first charge. The foundation. The weeks that followed were a descent into a grey, featureless purgatory. Catherine moved out of the Carlisle and into a discreet, furnished apartment on the Upper West Side. It was elegant but impersonal, a place to exist, not to live. The legal battle began in earnest, and it was as brutal as David had predicted. Richard's lawyers were relentless. They filed motions demanding access to her personal emails and phone records, attempting to build a case that she was unstable or unfaithful herself. They deposed old friends, trying to twist memories into admissions of her disinterest in Richard's career. It was a war of 1,000 paper cuts designed to exhaust and demoralize her. Richard, meanwhile, was thriving. He and Amber were the new darlings of the city's elite. They were photographed at every major charity event, their romance chronicled in glossy magazines. Amber, installed as the new executive vice president of Sterling Capital, gave interviews about her vision for the brand, using phrases and concepts Catherine recognized as her own. The world saw a dynamic power couple. Catherine saw a thief and his accomplice flaunting their spoils. Her own world had shrunk. Friends who had once flocked to her Park Avenue dinner parties now hesitated to return her calls, afraid of being caught in the crossfire and losing favor with the mighty Richard Sterling. She was a social leper. The loneliness was a physical weight pressing down on her day and night. One rain-lashed Tuesday afternoon, she hit her lowest point. A legal bill for an astronomical sum lay on her coffee table. A gossip website had posted a particularly cruel story filled with fabricated details about her lavish spending and emotional outbursts. She sat on the floor of her anonymous apartment, surrounded by boxes of legal documents, and felt a wave of utter despair. Maybe Richard was right. Maybe she was obsolete. Maybe she should have taken the $50 million and disappeared. She stared at the boxes labeled Sterling v. Sterling, and felt a sudden violent urge to burn them all. To burn everything. Let the past turn to ash. She walked to the box labeled Personal Effects, Park Ave Study, and ripped it open, searching for old photo albums, something to incinerate. Instead, her fingers brushed against a smooth cylindrical tube. She pulled it out. It was a roll of old architectural drawings, bound with a faded rubber band. Curiosity piqued. She unrolled it on the floor. It was one of the very first concept sketches for the Sterling Tower. Her own handwriting was in the margins. It dated back to 4 years ago, before the star architects and the army of consultants, when it was just her and Richard in his study, dreaming on paper. She saw her initial notes on the load-bearing structures, her ideas for the double-paned, energy-recovering glass, her vision for a public atrium filled with greenery. As she traced the familiar lines with her finger, she wasn't filled with nostalgia, but with a resurgent intellectual anger. So much of what made the building unique had started here in her mind, and she had been written out of the story completely. She spent the rest of the day and all of the night sifting through the boxes. She wasn't looking for memories anymore. She was looking for ammunition. She found her old notebooks filled with dated entries. October 17th, 2021. R worried about the OS integration for the building's climate control. I suggested he look into Helios Systems, a small startup in Palo Alto. Their predictive AI is revolutionary. Should be able to acquire them cheap before they get big. January 12th, 2022. Met with R and the structural engineers. They're concerned about wind shear at the upper levels. I sketched out a variation on a tuned mass damper, incorporating it into the spire design itself, not just as a dead weight. It's more elegant, saves space. March 5th, 2022. R landed the zoning variants. My idea to frame the public atrium as a privately owned public space with an arts grant for local sculptors was the key. He called it his masterstroke of civic diplomacy in the staff meeting. I wasn't mentioned. Page after page, it was all there. Her contributions, her intellectual property, all co-opted and presented to the world as the singular genius of Richard Sterling. He hadn't just stolen her future, he had stolen her past too. But it was a note from late 2022 that made her stop. It was about the tower's much-vaunted central operating system, the brain of the building that Richard had named Prometheus OS. It controlled everything from HVAC and security to energy distribution. Richard had told the press it was developed entirely in-house by a secret R&D team at Sterling Capital. Her note read, R is moving forward with the acquisition of Helios Systems. But the founder, a man named Ben Carter, is playing hardball. He doesn't want to sell, wants to license the tech instead. R is furious, says Carter is a naive kid, sitting on a gold mine. He doesn't know how to dig. R told me he was going to handle it. She remembered that conversation. Richard had been enraged, ranting about Carter's idealism. After that, he never mentioned Helios or Ben Carter again. A few months later, he announced the successful internal development of Prometheus OS. A cold suspicion began to form in Catherine's mind. She got on her laptop and started digging. Helios Systems was gone. A few old articles mentioned their groundbreaking AI, but the company had folded in early 2023, citing a catastrophic server crash and loss of their core intellectual property, followed by a key engineer leaving unexpectedly. They had gone bankrupt, and their founder, Ben Carter. He had seemingly vanished from the tech world. Catherine stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Richard hadn't acquired the company. He had gutted it. He had taken their technology. Prometheus OS wasn't an in-house innovation. It was a theft. The Sterling Tower wasn't just a monument to Richard's ego. It was a monument built on a lie, its very foundation rotten with deceit. This was it. This was the vulnerability she had been looking for. It wasn't about a note in a journal or a shared idea over dinner. This was tangible, provable corporate espionage. But proving it would require more than old notebooks. It would require a skill set she didn't possess. She needed someone who could navigate the dark corners of the digital world, someone who could find the digital fingerprints Richard's team had undoubtedly tried to erase. She called David Chen the next morning. Her voice was different. The despair was gone, replaced by a chillingly calm resolve. David, I need you to find someone for me, she said. I'm not looking for an investigator who follows cheating spouses. I need a ghost, a top-tier cybersecurity expert, a forensic analyst, someone who can trace a digital trail that is 2 years cold and has been deliberately buried. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Catherine, what have you found?" "I've found the blueprints for Richard's downfall," she replied. "Now I just need someone to help me wire the explosives." David Chen delivered. 3 days later, he slid a simple manila folder across the polished table of a private library room he'd booked for them. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a name and an encrypted email address. "Nina Petrova," David said, his voice low. "Ex-NSA. One of the best white-hat hackers they had, specializing in corporate counter-espionage. She left the agency 5 years ago and started her own private security consultancy. She's brilliant, she's paranoid, and she's expensive." "Is she the best?" Catherine asked. "She's the one governments call when they think another government has stolen their secrets," David replied. "But there's a complication. 2 years ago, her firm was hired by a venture capital fund to do a security audit. That fund was later acquired by Sterling Capital in a hostile takeover. Richard gutted the fund, fired everyone, and then sued Petrova's firm for breach of contract over a technicality effectively bankrupting her. He wanted the fund's assets, and she was just collateral damage." Catherine looked up from the folder, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "So she doesn't just have the skills. She has a motive." "She has a vendetta," David corrected, "which makes her either the perfect ally or an uncontrollable liability. Be careful, Catherine." Catherine memorized the email address and burned the paper in an ashtray before she left. That evening, from a new laptop purchased with cash and using the public Wi-Fi at a university library, she sent the email. It was short and cryptic. Subject: a mutual friend, Richard Sterling, body. "I believe you held a contract with a VC fund, Sterling Capital, acquired in 2023. I have reason to believe the methods used against you were part of a larger pattern of predatory business practices. I have information regarding the origins of Prometheus OS. I propose a meeting. I can prove I am not a trap." She included a small encrypted file. It was a scan of 1 page from her journal, the page mentioning Helios Systems and Ben Carter. It was enough to prove she had inside knowledge, but not enough to reveal her entire hand. The reply came 27 minutes later. From NP subject Re. "A mutual friend, Richard Sterling. Body tomorrow, 3 p.m. Roosevelt Island Tramway. West entrance. Come alone. Don't be followed. You'll be watched from the moment you leave your building." The choice of venue was a test. It was public yet isolated with limited entry and exit points, a place where it was easy to spot a tail. Catherine arrived 15 minutes early, taking the subway and walking the last few blocks. The tramcar floated high above the East River, a small capsule suspended between the towers of Manhattan and the quiet solitude of the island. She saw her immediately. Nina Petrova was leaning against a railing, looking out at the water. She was younger than Catherine expected, perhaps in her mid-30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and she was dressed in nondescript jeans and a leather jacket. She radiated an aura of coiled, watchful energy. "Mrs. Sterling," Nina said without turning around. Her voice was low with the faint trace of an Eastern European accent. "You're punctual, and you weren't followed. Good start." "Ms. Petrova," Catherine replied, stepping beside her. "Thank you for meeting me." Nina finally turned to face her. her gaze intense and analytical, as if she were debugging a piece of faulty code. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries. Your husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, is a viper. He ruined my business, my reputation. He cost me everything. Why in the world should I believe his wife is any different? Because his wife is the one he's trying to ruin now," Catherine said simply. "And because I have something neither his money nor his lawyers can buy the truth." For the next hour, as the tramcars glided back and forth overhead, Catherine laid it all out. She told Nina about Helios systems, about Ben Carter, about her journals, and her suspicion that Prometheus OS was stolen technology. She spoke with a calm, factual precision that left no room for doubt. She wasn't a hysterical, scorned wife. She was an intelligent source delivering a briefing. Nina listened, her expression unreadable. When Catherine was finished, she was silent for a long time, watching the turbulent waters of the river below. "What you're suggesting is grand larceny on a corporate scale," Nina said finally. "The kind of thing that sends people to federal prison for a very long time. Proving it would require deep-dive forensics. We'd need access to Sterling Capital's internal servers, Richard's personal devices, archived communications. It's not just difficult, it's practically impossible without a warrant." "That's why I came to you," Catherine said. "Because I was told you specialize in the impossible." A flicker of something professional pride, perhaps, showed in Nina's eyes. "Even for me, this is a major risk. If we get caught, we're the ones who go to prison. What's in it for me? 2 things. Catherine answered, her voice firm. "First, I will fund the entire operation. My pre-marriage portfolio gives me enough liquid capital to provide you with whatever resources you need. Hardware, safe houses, anything. Second, and more importantly, revenge. I will give you the chance to burn Richard Sterling's empire to the ground, and I'll make sure the world knows you're the one holding the match. When the dust settles, your reputation will be restored, and every corporation in the world will know who to call when they need the best." She saw the shift in Nina's posture, the subtle clenching of her jaw. She had struck the right chord. It wasn't just about money, it was about reclamation. Richard had taken Nina's professional standing, and Catherine was offering her a chance to take it back with interest. "And what do you get out of it?" Nina asked, testing her. "You could use this information as leverage for a massive settlement. Why go to war when you can just walk away rich? Because he called my life's work an old museum," Catherine said, her voice dropping to a whisper, but laced with the hardness of diamond. "He thinks he can erase me. This is not about money. It's about a correction. I'm going to correct the public record. I helped build that man, and I'm going to be the one to dismantle him. Publicly, humiliatingly, irreversibly." Nina studied her for another long moment. Then a slow, wolfish grin spread across her face. It was the first time Catherine had seen her smile. "All right, Mrs. Sterling," Nina said, extending a hand. "You have a partner. But we do this my way. No mistakes, no emotions, no cutting corners. We will be ghosts until the moment we choose to be a firestorm." Catherine shook her hand. The grip was firm, resolute. An alliance was forged on that wind-swept island, a partnership between 2 women from vastly different worlds, united by a common enemy: the architect and the ghost. Together they were going to draw up the blueprints of a masterpiece of destruction. The following months were a masterclass in clandestine operations. Catherine's life split into 2 distinct parallel streams. To the outside world and to Richard's legal team. She was the beleaguered ex-wife, slowly being ground down by the litigation process. She allowed David to engage in protracted, frustrating negotiations over assets, creating the perfect smokescreen of a conventional, messy divorce. She played the part beautifully, appearing weary and stressed in the few paparazzi photos that surfaced. Richard, consumed by his own arrogance, saw what he wanted to see, a woman on the verge of breaking, who would eventually take a revised, slightly more generous settlement and fade away. Her real life began after dark. Nina had set up their base of operations in the subleased basement of a nondescript commercial building in Long Island City. The space was a stark contrast to Catherine's world, a chaotic web of cable servers and monitors, smelling of ozone and stale coffee. This was Nina's element. On a massive screen, she had mapped out the entire digital infrastructure of Sterling Capital, a complex universe of servers, firewalls, and encrypted networks. Sterling's security is world-class, Nina explained during one of their first sessions, her fingers flying across a keyboard. But every fortress has a back door. The key is not to storm the gates, but to find the one unlocked window that everyone forgot about. Catherine's role was not passive. She was the human intelligence expert. Her intimate knowledge of Richard was their greatest asset. She knew his habits, his passwords, his psychological weak spots. She remembered the name of his first dog, Caesar, his mother's maiden name, Donovan, the anniversary of his father's death, all the common roots of security questions. "He's arrogant," Catherine told Nina, pointing to a diagram of the executive server. "He believes he's too smart to be hacked. He'll have a complex password, but it will be based on something that feeds his ego. Try variations of his sailing yacht's name, the Invictus, combined with the date he made his first billion." It took Nina 3 days of running algorithms, but Catherine's insight provided the breakthrough. They gained a toehold, a low-level access point into the company's internal marketing server. It was a start. While Nina waged her digital war, Catherine fought on a different front, the social one. She began to carefully, subtly re-engage with her old life. She had lunch with wives of board members, women she knew were secretly tired of their husbands' deference to Richard. She never mentioned the divorce directly. Instead, she spoke with a quiet dignity about her new projects, hinting at a venture she was starting in architectural preservation. She presented herself not as a victim, but as a woman quietly rebuilding, which garnered a grudging respect. She planted seeds of doubt with surgical precision. To a gossip columnist she knew was on the payroll of a rival firm, she might let slip a wistful comment. "Richard was always so brilliant at marketing. I remember when he first came up with the idea for Prometheus OS. It was almost fully formed, like it came out of nowhere. So incredible." It was an innocent-sounding remark that to a cynical ear hinted at a story. To the wife of Richard's chief financial officer, she'd sigh and say, "I do worry about Richard. The pressure of the tower launch is immense. He's bet the entire company on its success. I hope he's managed all the risks." She was stoking the quiet fears she knew already existed within the company's upper echelon. Meanwhile, Nina's digital excavation was yielding results. She moved like a phantom through Sterling Capital's network, finding traces of the Helios system's theft. She uncovered fragmented emails deleted from the main servers, but recoverable from archived backup tapes discussing Project Nightingale, the internal code name for the acquisition and reverse engineering of the Helios AI. She found payment records to a shell corporation that had paid off a key Helios engineer just weeks before he resigned. The smoking gun, however, remained elusive. They needed an undeniable link to Richard himself. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Richard, in his hubris, was planning the grandest event the city had seen in years, the grand unveiling of the Sterling Tower. It was to be a black-tie gala held in the tower's soaring 100-story atrium. The mayor, the governor, international investors, and the world's media would be there. It was to be the night Richard Sterling officially ascended from a mere billionaire to a global icon. "He's going to give the keynote address himself," Catherine said, scrolling through the event plans that Amber had foolishly stored on the lightly secured marketing server. "He'll be controlling the presentation from his own personal tablet, linked to the tower's central network." Nina's eyes lit up with a dangerous glint. His personal device, connected directly to the building's mainframe. "It's arrogant, it's sloppy, and it's the open window we've been looking for." The plan began to crystallize. It was audacious high risk and aimed at causing maximum catastrophic damage. It wasn't enough to leak the information to a newspaper. That would result in a scandal, lawsuits, a massive stock drop. Richard might even survive it, painting himself as the victim of a rogue employee. Catherine wanted more. She wanted annihilation. The revenge would not be a quiet expose. It would be a live, public execution on the grandest stage Richard could build. In their basement command center, they began to prepare for the final act. Nina started coding what she called her Trojan horse, a piece of malware that once inside the tower's network could lie dormant until activated. It would give them complete control of the atrium's massive media screens and audio system. Catherine, in the meantime, had one last piece of human intelligence to gather. She tracked down Ben Carter, the founder of Helios Systems. She found him living a quiet life in rural Vermont, teaching computer science at a community college. He was a broken man, convinced he had simply been outmaneuvered and defeated by a corporate giant. Catherine flew to Vermont and met him at a small diner. She didn't record their conversation. She simply introduced herself and laid out what she knew. She showed him the proof Nina had gathered. As he looked at the evidence of the deliberate sabotage and theft of his life's work, the color drained from his face. "I knew it," he whispered, his hands trembling. "I knew they did something, but I could never prove it." "We can prove it now, Mr. Carter," Catherine said gently. "And on the night of the tower's grand opening, the entire world is going to hear your story. All I need from you is a video statement. Tell your story in your own words, and be ready." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and a long, dormant hope. He finally nodded. "He took everything from me. It's time someone took something from him." As Catherine flew back to New York, she felt a profound sense of calm. All the pieces were in place. Richard and Amber were busy sending out embossed invitations, selecting floral arrangements, and tasting champagne. They were planning a party. Catherine and Nina were planning a demolition. The night of the gala was a symphony of excess. A river of black cars flowed towards the base of the Sterling Tower, depositing the city's most powerful and influential figures onto a plush red carpet. The tower itself was a breathtaking spectacle, its glass and steel facade illuminated by sweeping spotlights that painted a testament to Richard Sterling's ego against the dark canvas of the night sky. The atrium was a cathedral of modern architecture, 300 feet high, filled with the sound of a string quartet, clinking champagne flutes, and the self-congratulatory murmur of the global elite. At the center of it all stood Richard Sterling, resplendent in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo. On his arm, draped in glittering couture, was Amber Collins, her smile as dazzling and artificial as the diamond necklace she wore. They moved through the crowd like royalty, accepting accolades, their faces beaming with triumph. For Richard, this was more than a building launch. It was his coronation. He had won. His divorce was nearly finalized. His new life was beginning, and his monument was complete. He felt untouchable. Catherine watched from afar. Not from the party, but from the Long Island City Command Center. The raw video feed from a dozen hacked security cameras played across one of Nina's monitors, turning the glamorous event into a cold, tactical display. She wore a simple black turtleneck and trousers, her face illuminated by the glow of the screens. Ben Carter was with them, patched in via a secure video link from his home in Vermont, his face pale and tense. David Chen was on standby in his office, a team of paralegals ready to file a dozen lawsuits the moment the signal was given. "We're in," Nina whispered, her eyes fixed on her code. "The Trojan horse is inside the main network. I have control of the audio-visual system for the entire atrium. It's all yours, Catherine. On your command." Catherine watched the main feed where Richard was now ascending the stage, an enormous state-of-the-art media screen behind him, displaying the shimmering Sterling Capital logo. The crowd fell silent. The moment had arrived. "Friends, colleagues, visionaries." Richard began, his voice booming through the atrium. "Welcome, welcome to the future. They said it couldn't be done. A building that thinks, that breathes, that learns. A structure that is not just environmentally conscious, but environmentally intelligent. We didn't just build a skyscraper. We built a landmark of human ingenuity. And we did it with a revolutionary heart, an operating system forged in the fires of Sterling Capital, Innovation Prometheus OS." The crowd erupted in applause. On the screen behind Richard, a slick marketing video began to play, showcasing the wonders of the OS. Catherine took a deep breath. Now Nina. Nina's fingers danced across her keyboard. A single line of code was executed. On the stage, Richard clicked his tablet to advance to the next slide. Nothing happened. He frowned and clicked again. On the massive screen behind him, the Sterling Capital logo flickered, distorted, and then vanished, replaced by a black screen. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Richard, looking flustered, tapped his tablet frantically. "A slight technical glitch, ladies and gentlemen," he said, forcing a laugh. "Even the future has bugs." Then the screen flashed to life. But it wasn't the next slide of his presentation. It was a scanned image of a page from Catherine's journal, her handwriting clear and damning, detailing her initial suggestion to acquire Helios Systems. Richard froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. Before he could speak, the image was replaced by another, the corporate registration of the shell company, used to pay off the Helios engineer. Then another, a bank statement showing the transfer of funds. The evidence scrolled by one piece after another, a silent, damning indictment. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder, filled with confusion and alarm. Amber, standing at the side of the stage, looked horrified, her perfect smile melting into a mask of panic. "Turn it off," Richard hissed into his lapel mic to his tech team. "Kill the feed, now." But there was no response. Nina had locked them out completely. Then the face of Ben Carter appeared on the screen, life-sized. He looked directly into the camera, his expression grim but resolute. "My name is Ben Carter." He began, his voice filling the cavernous space, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. "I am the founder of a company called Helios Systems, and I am the true creator of the technology you know as Prometheus OS." A collective gasp went through the atrium. Every phone was now out recording. The media scrum at the back of the room surged forward, cameras flashing. Ben Carter, proceeded to tell his story. He spoke of his dream of Richard Sterling's initial interest, of his refusal to sell, and of the subsequent mysterious sabotage that destroyed his company. As he spoke, Nina interspersed his narrative with the hard, evident snippets of recovered emails from Richard's own executives discussing Project Nightingale audio fragments from a board meeting where Richard dismissed Carter as an obstacle to be removed, and finally the digital schematic of the original Helios AI core code laid side by side with the code for Prometheus OS. The signatures were identical. It was undeniable, irrefutable proof of theft on an epic scale. Richard stood on the stage, paralyzed, a statue of impotent fury. His face had turned a ghastly shade of white. He was exposed, stripped bare, in front of the very people he sought to impress, his legacy revealed as a fraud in the monument he had built to house it. The final image on the screen was not of code or documents. It was the photo of Richard and Amber in St. Bart's, the one Catherine had found all those months ago. Below it, a single line of text appeared. Some foundations are built on lies. All of them eventually crumble. Then the screen went black. A deafening silence fell over the atrium, broken only by the frantic clicking of cameras. Every eye was on Richard Sterling. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at Amber, but she wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the audience, at the investors, at the reporters. Her face a portrait of pure horror. She wasn't seeing a man she loved being destroyed. She was seeing her own future, her penthouse, her status evaporating before her very eyes. In that moment, Richard saw it too. He saw the cold, transactional ambition in her gaze. He had chosen her, and she had only ever chosen his success. The first person to walk out was a major investor from Tokyo, then another. Then it became a flood. The elite of New York, the people whose approval he craved, were abandoning his sinking ship, their faces a mixture of disgust and schadenfreude. In the command center, Catherine watched the exodus. She felt no elation, no triumphant joy. She simply felt a profound, quiet sense of completion. It was over. "It's done," Nina said, softly, leaning back in her chair. "The world has the story. David has already filed the lawsuits. The SEC will be at his door by morning." Catherine nodded, her eyes still on the camera feed of the man on the stage, now utterly alone in his glass cathedral. He hadn't just lost his company's reputation. He had lost his identity. He was no longer Richard Sterling, the visionary. He was a thief, and she was the one who had corrected the record. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The heist on the Hudson became a global media firestorm. Sterling Capital's stock was wiped out, and federal investigators swarmed its offices. Richard Sterling, forced out as CEO, became a pariah overnight. His memberships were revoked, his name stripped from charity walls, and he was left trapped in his Park Avenue penthouse facing a barrage of lawsuits and a looming federal indictment. His ruin was absolute. Amber Collins vanished the day after the gala, re-emerging months later in Monaco, on the arm of another wealthy benefactor. She had only ever been invested in his success, not the man. Catherine, by contrast, conducted herself with quiet dignity. She issued a single public statement, affirming her desire for justice, refused all interviews, and finalized her divorce. She received her rightful half of the marital estate, not as a prize, but as the capital for her new beginning. She did not retire. Instead, she founded the Vance Restoration Group, using her maiden name to build a firm dedicated to preserving historic buildings, giving old structures with strong foundations a new life. Her work was her purpose. Her actions also created new futures for her allies. Nina Petrova's cybersecurity firm became legendary, and Ben Carter, finally compensated for his stolen work, successfully relaunched his own company, Helios AI. A year later, Catherine stood on a construction site for one of her projects, her son Robert by her side. Across the river, the Sterling Tower stood as a half-empty renamed monument to hubris. It held no power over her anymore. She had learned the most important architectural lesson of all: a structure, no matter how grand, is worthless if its foundation is compromised. Richard had built an empire on lies, and it had crumbled. Catherine was now building a legacy on a foundation of integrity and truth, and it was a structure designed to last forever. Catherine Sterling's story isn't just about revenge. It's a testament to the quiet strength that is so often underestimated. It's a reminder that the foundations we build in others can be reclaimed to build something even stronger for ourselves. Richard Sterling saw his wife as a beautiful relic of his past, but he forgot that history is built on solid ground, and when you betray your foundation, the entire empire is destined to crumble. What did you think of Catherine's intricate revenge? Was it justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of resilience and retribution, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories of real-life drama. Your support helps us bring these powerful narratives to light.